But thinking of Janine, I want to ask you today, can you think about the people in your life that helped make you who you are today? The people who guided you, the people who mentored you, the people who helped make you who you are today. If I were to ask you that question, who would you say? I imagine there are many people in this room that would say Janine King. Personally, I think of my college professor, Bob Drovedal, who taught me about prayer. I think about my high school teacher, Tom Airy, who taught me how to ask questions. I think of John Mason, who taught me what it means to be a pastor. Who helped shape you? When we think about mentorship, there is no better example than Paul and Timothy. Paul will go on to pass along his teaching, his theology, his methodology, the very passion in his heart. He'll go on to pass that along to Timothy. And over the years, the two will develop a sacred bond. Our text this morning is their first meeting. It's an important moment for the history of the church. In fact, when Paul writes his letters to the Philippians, the Colossians, and the Thessalonians, he will write on behalf of himself and his disciple, Timothy. When the church in Corinth struggles with division and conflict, Paul will send Timothy to intervene. When the church in Ephesus has struggles with theological issues and issues around doctrine, Paul assigns Timothy to be the primary teacher there. And when Paul comes to the end of his life, the last two letters that he writes, the final words that we have on record from the Apostle Paul, he writes to Timothy. Remember, Paul didn't have any children of his own, but he calls Timothy my beloved child. Do you have a Timothy in your life? It is the task of the church for us to pass on the faith to the next generation. As we see in our text this morning, when Paul meets Timothy, he hears that Timothy is well spoken of by the other believers in that area. And so Paul takes Timothy on to be his apprentice, but then he does something absolutely shocking. He has Timothy circumcised. Now, I know what you're saying. As we've been studying Acts, we have had too much discussion of eunuchs and circumcision. Pastor Dan, when will you stop talking about it?
Anytime.
Tom, I want to recommend a therapist to you. Several in this church. I'm just going to invite you to humor me this last time as we talk a little bit about circumcision. Dawn. The decision to have Timothy circumcised is shocking because this happens in Acts 16, but in Acts 15, just before the Jerusalem council had just determined that Gentiles don't need to be circumcised to become Christians. And Paul wasn't just a part of that council, he was one of the main advocates saying that we should not require circumcision for faith. He even says in chapter 15, why on earth would we put these kinds of burdens on Gentiles when we know we're all saved by the grace of Jesus Christ? So isn't it a little hypocritical to make poor Timothy, poor Timothy, who is at this point probably a late teenager or in his early 20s, isn't it somewhat unnecessary to make this poor young man go through a painful procedure like this, again in a day without anesthetic? After all, Paul gets angry whenever Jewish Christians would put legalistic burdens like this on Gentiles. He says in Galatians 5, that if people are preaching that you have to be circumcised to be a Christian, you know what Paul says? He says, I wish that those folks would just go ahead and castrate themselves. Again, sorry, Dawn. What? Paul? Yes, that is in the Bible. But the thing you have to understand about Paul, which he would have passed on to his disciple Timothy, is that nothing matters more in this life than sharing the gospel and seeing lives being transformed. It was the most important thing in Paul's life, and it becomes the most important thing in Timothy's life. And I think the best glimpse that we get into Paul's mind about his approach to ministry comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 9, where he says, "Though I am free with respect to all, I have made myself a slave to all, so that I might win more of them. To the Jews I became as a Jew in order to win Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became as one outside the law, though I am not free from God's law, but I am under Christ's law, so that I might win those outside the law. To the weak I became weak, so that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that I might by all means save some. And I do it all," Paul says, "for the sake of the gospel." Paul has Timothy circumcised so that the Jews would be more willing, more open, more receptive to hearing the important message of the gospel. This is about strategy. Think about this. When Paul would ever visit a new city on one of his mission trips, the first place he would go to is the synagogue. He would start with the Jews. And he didn't want Timothy's Jewish status or lack thereof to be a stumbling block for Jews hearing the gospel. Even though, yes, Timothy's mother was Jewish, and in the ancient world, your Jewish identity, your Jewish lineage was actually more so tied to your mother than your father. That was actually just for practical purposes because it's easier to prove who your mother is than your father. We can all see when a woman is pregnant. But the fact that Timothy was not circumcised and the fact that his father was Greek would have been an issue for many Jews. Remember, observant Jews considered intermarriage between Jews and pagans to be a horrible sin. Timothy would not have been seen as a pure blood, to use Harry Potter language. Paul didn't want it to be a distraction. So he has Timothy circumcised. Now, the big question for us today is, so what? Who cares? A guy was circumcised 2,000 years ago. Stop the presses. Why is it such a big deal? But what I'm really interested in is the question behind the question. Why would Timothy do it? Why was Paul willing to endure so much suffering on these mission trips that he went on? I mean, listen to what Paul says about his hardships in 2 Corinthians. He says, 5 times I received from the Jews 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I received a stoning. 3 times I was shipwrecked. For a night and a day I was adrift at sea. On frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, danger from bandits, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brothers and sisters, in toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, hungry and thirsty, often without food, cold and naked. And eventually Paul would go on to be executed in Rome. And tradition tells us that Timothy would go on to be executed by the empire. Why would they do it? In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl once wrote, "Those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how." Paul and Timothy did the unthinkable because they had found the ultimate why. I'm talking about finding true purpose in life. Paul and Timothy had found the answer to the greatest question that puzzles all of us. Why are we here? For what purpose do we exist? What is life all about? The problem is that we live in a world today, especially here in the West, that has lost touch with true meaning and purpose for living. We live in a selfish, superficial, shallow culture. You don't believe me? Help me understand, why is it that depression and anxiety and suicide continue to be on the rise? Why is it that there is this massive opioid epidemic? Why is it that people are continuing to numb out on drugs and alcohol? Why is there this large percentage of young men in this next generation who are spending the majority of their time playing video games? There's a growing number of people who prefer to live their life online instead of here in the real world. It's because they think that they have nothing better to live for. They've either lost or never had true meaning and purpose in life. And isn't it interesting that over the last 50 years, as humanism and naturalism and atheism have grown in prominence in the West, that we have seen a steady decline in hope and meaning and purpose in the lives of people. And we are seeing the effects of it. There is a vast meaninglessness in our culture today. I mean, if you tell an entire generation that there is no truth, there is no hope, there is no God, what do you think is going to happen to them? We're seeing it right now. Atheist philosopher Bertrand Russell puts it this way: the origin of man, his growth, his hopes, his fears, his loves, and his beliefs are the outcome of the accidental collection of atoms. That no fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve an individual life beyond the grave. That all the labors of all the ages, all the devotion, all inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vastness of the death of our solar system. This is how many folks think today. That there is no hope, there is no future, so there is no meaning. So let us eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. But has that way of living ever fulfilled us? Because there's something deep down inside us that stirs, that beckons, that longs for meaning and purpose. Almost as if we've been hardwired for it. And it's interesting to note that there is this growing trend in the fields of psychology and sociology and philosophy for a renewed interest in the benefits of faith. We're seeing this right now in the academy. Again, almost as if we were built for it. Justin Brierley is a radio talk show host in the United Kingdom, and he interviews some of the world's leading scientists and philosophers and theologians. Oftentimes, he'll bring them onto his radio show, many times Christians and atheists, and he'll have them talk about science and faith and philosophy. And in his book, The Surprising Rebirth in the Belief in God, he notes a growing trend, even in secular England, of people becoming dissatisfied with what he calls the atheistic explanation of reality. He says both intellectuals and lay people are starting to reject what many folks have called the new atheist movement because they are longing for something deeper. He tells a story of one man in Australia who one day was sitting in a harbor, looking at the water, watching the sunset, listening to Beethoven. And this young man was a committed atheist, and he was trying so hard to hold on to his atheism, but he said in that moment, looking at this beautiful sight, hearing this amazing music, he said, I lost my faith in atheism. Couldn't do it anymore. Life is just too beautiful. Or the story of Jen Fulwiler, who is an author and a comedian who lost her faith in atheism after her son was born. She writes, "I looked down and thought, what is this baby? And I thought, well, from my pure atheist, materialist perspective, he is a collection of randomly evolved chemical reactions. And I realized that if that's true, and all the love that I feel for him, it is nothing more than a chemical reaction in my brain. And I looked down at him and I realized that's not true. That's not true. There's something deep inside us that longs for meaning and purpose. But of course, secular thinkers will try to tell you, you just have to create your own meaning. Just make it up. My question, though, is, can a make-believe purpose truly fulfill us? If you know deep down inside that everything you'll ever do or ever achieve is ultimately going to die with the vast death of our solar system, as Russell said in that quote, is that real meaning or is it an illusion? A pretend meaning? Can we live with a make-believe meaning if we know it's an illusion? It's kind of like the movie The Matrix with Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves plays a character named Neo, comes to discover that the world he lives in is actually an alternate reality. But my question is, what if Neo, after discovering the truth about the Matrix, decided to continue living in that alternate reality because it was comfortable? The truth is, I don't think he could ever really be happy. Because once you've seen the truth, you cannot unsee it. Making your own meaning will not satisfy the deepest desires and longings of your heart because deep down you know it's an illusion, doomed to die. But of course, the biggest mistake that people make is simply choosing the wrong purpose. A lot of us, we live for our work. Our career is what drives us. We put in countless hours. We do anything we can to get ahead. We might even fill up our bank account. But as Thomas Merton once said, we can spend our whole lives climbing the ladder of success only to realize that once you get to the top, the ladder's been leaning against the wrong wall. Because the truth is, after we retire, nobody cares about the work you did. The truth is, after you die, within 1 or 2 generations, nobody's going to remember the work you did. And life goes by fast. But a lot of folks today are going to look for a purpose in a political cause or a social justice initiative. But I'm going to tell you, friends, it doesn't take long to get burned out, to grow bitter, trying to change the world. Have you noticed that a lot of activists are perpetually angry and jaded? It's a hard way to live. Some of us will try to find purpose in our spouse or in our kids. Psychologists will call this enmeshment. And if you try to make your family the reason for your existence, then you're going to crush them with the weight of your expectations. You got to remember, spouses let us down. Kids let us down. Spouses die. Kids move out. Won't work. But a lot of Americans simply try living for themselves. This is becoming more and more so the case. Seeking to satisfy their urges, everything is about finding pleasure, or obsessing over their appearance or their fitness, which I never really understood. But they obsess over it while they neglect the well-being of their neighbors. But these people are to be pitied most of all, because when you go through life assuming that everything is about you, you will never really learn what love is all about. Because life is all about them. The hard truth is that we cannot live without purpose. We will not be fulfilled with a self-made, make-believe purpose, and we try to find purpose in the wrong things, we're going to end up shattered in the end. So the question this morning is, what do we do? We need a meaning and a purpose that transcends our own existence, a meaning and purpose that is bigger than us, that goes beyond us, a meaning and purpose that is not made up or fake or phony, but one that is real and pure and good and true. We need a God-sized purpose. That's the only thing that'll do. And the only purpose that'll actually fill the void in your heart is not just a purpose, it's a person. The God-man, Jesus Christ, the one who lives forever, who is eternal, the author of life, the perfect embodiment of what goodness and love is all about. And the good news is that this God-man is inviting each and every one of us to be a part of his redemptive story in the world. He's inviting you to have the meaning and purpose that you've always longed for. And it doesn't matter how old you are, how young you are, you can have that purpose now. I love that scene from the movie Dead Poets Society when Robin Williams' character, Mr. Keating, tells his students why poetry is so important. Do you remember this scene? He says, we don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race, and the human race is filled with passion. And medicine, law, business, engineering, these are all noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for. To quote from Whitman, "O me, O life, of the questions of these reoccurring, of the endless trains of the faithless, of cities filled with the foolish, what good amid these, O me, O life? Answer, that you are here. That life exists and identity, that the powerful play goes on and that you may contribute a verse, that the powerful play goes on and that you may contribute a verse." Jesus is inviting you to be a part of the greatest, the grandest, most important, powerful play in all the universe. And you can contribute a verse. Is there a better meaning? Is there a better purpose than that? One that is eternal, one that is good and beautiful. And this powerful play is full of drama and comedy and suspense and adventure. It is life itself. And Jesus is saying, come, follow me. I have a purpose for your life. He tells his disciples, come, follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men. Come, follow me, join the powerful play. It will not be easy, but it's the only thing that matters in the end. Do you have purpose for your life? Or are you going around just completely submerged and that ever-present thought of meaninglessness? Do you have purpose for your life? Have you found that purpose for your life, the ultimate purpose for your life? That's exactly what Paul and Timothy found. And that's why they would be willing to do anything and everything for that purpose. They're willing to make sacrifices. They're willing to suffer. They're willing to die because Paul had seen the risen Lord Jesus and he knew it was true. Do you have that kind of purpose in your life? You can have it this morning. And you find that kind of purpose when you discover the immensity of God's love and power for you to have a transformed life. And we experience that most here at the communion table.